Today's show is sponsored by Indie Film Hustle's Filmmaker Process. We provide filmmakers with professional services to get their films or series funded, finished, and distributed. For more information, go to filmmakerprocess.com. I think one misconception that I hear a lot of screenwriters that I talk to all the time is that they, very much like independent filmmakers, they think they're making films today like it was 1992. So they like thinking of like, oh, I'll just go to Sundance and I'll get this and that. And they have this kind of magical world that was then. I think screenwriters have the same thing with the spec market, which in the 90s, I mean, the Shane Blacks and the Joe Esterhouses. I mean,
right.
Can you talk a little bit about the spec market and what is, if there is a spec market, is it happening? What's the deal?
Yeah, there's not really all that much of a spec market right now. A few scripts have sold. Clearly, this is not a banner year for selling a screenplay on spec, which is why screenwriters should be writing, because there is a possibility that when this drought is over, that people will be looking for content, much like after any WGA strike. We've often seen. Remember, a lot of that spec boom of the early '90s was fueled by the writers' strike in the late '80s. So there is a great possibility that will be hungry for content once the industry is up and running again, which is why people should be writing now. Worry less about the business at this moment and concentrate more on the creative, because then I think you will be prepared for the business when it is reanimated.
Now, what is one of the biggest misconceptions that screenwriters have about the industry, about Hollywood in general?
Oh boy, I don't know, probably thousands.
A few.
I think. Well, I don't know. I think that maybe some more naive writers might think that they literally just sort of can write a screenplay and then the doors sort of open for them. I don't really understand that process as to how the doors would just automatically open, but that's what they think, or they feel like because they've written a screenplay that the industry owes them the respect, the time to read their script, when that is definitely not the case by any means. I'm not saying that they don't deserve the respect and time. Sure they do, but nobody's going to give it to them. So I think that's a really big misconception. I think another big misconception, of course, is that they're going to make millions and millions and millions of dollars writing screenplays, when, like anybody in this business, it's a lot of struggle. And one reason, of course, that writers, at least in the WGA, get paid what they get paid is because that might be all that they get paid for 3 or 4 years. And so they need that money to hold them over, right? This is why actors get residuals and et cetera, because the work is often far and few between. So there is a lot of struggle. There are, I think, misconceptions that a writer sells a script and their career is made. Right. I would say probably the majority of writers who sell scripts never go on to a career after that. It's it's like a one-hit wonder. You're always working. It never gets easy. And I really think that a lot of writers who haven't been out here, they think, I just need to sell that one script. I'm like, no, listen, if you sell it and it rocks the town, that's one thing. But that's not most script sales. Right. Most script sales are for low to no money, and they go under the radar. The movie's never made, or if the movie is made, nobody sees it.
Right.
So there's so many ways for your career not to get started after it's gotten started.
It's funny because I always tell people about Kaufman and Sorkin, like they have scripts that they can't produce, like they can't, that they're amazing, but no one's willing to give the money. And I always tell them, if Charlie Kaufman and Aaron Sorkin are having problems, what do you think you're going to have?
Right.
To be
exactly right.
be as realistic as possible about this.
That's right.
Well,
and not every script that an A-list writer writes hits it out of the ballpark.
Oh,
yeah, I've read a lot of scripts by writers that I love, and I'm like, yeah, this just doesn't work. This just doesn't work, and this probably wasn't a great project. That happens all the time. And for new writers, I think that they're often under the impression that because they wrote a screenplay that they've written a screenplay. And often when you read it, yeah, sure, it starts with fade in, it's got fade out, it's got slug lines, it's in proper format, it's got 120 pages, but it isn't a screenplay.
Right.
And so it often takes a lot of trial and error to be able to get to that screenplay that eventually can help you break through. So impatience is certainly an issue with new writers, thinking that they don't necessarily have to put in their time.
So so a 12-month plan is not long enough, is what you're telling me, to start my career as a screenwriter?
Yeah, I'd say 12 years
right.
is probably would be more realistic.
Right. Have a long, I have a 1-year plan. Like, you need a 10-year plan, and then you're just starting.
And listen, there are always exceptions to the rule. I had a student,
of course.
I had a student many years ago named Josh Schwartz, who's this phenomenal showrunner. He created the OC and lots and lots of other shows. The Runaways, which is on Disney Plus, I think.
Yeah.
And just right, on and on and on. Amazing kid, and he sold his first spec script for like $1.75 million or something like that.
Right.
And so people look to that and they're like, I'm going to do that. But that's the Powerball.
No, it's the lottery. It's the lottery ticket. I call it the lottery ticket.
Somebody wins the Powerball lottery
every week.
But that doesn't mean that you should quit your job and wait for your numbers to come in. So that to me is something that people really need to consider. Is the long-term plan, and just having patience.
Right, and that's every time people always ask me, what's your biggest piece of advice? I go, patience. It took me a long time. I mean, I just was talking to James V. Hart, who was on the show the other day, and after doing some research on him, he got Hook when he was in his 40s, right. and he was bumping around Hollywood for 10, 15 years. Had a couple of things produced, and he was writing and getting paid to write, but nothing was getting produced, and it was, then Mr. Spielberg called and life changed.
Right. And that can happen, but he really had to put in the mileage.
Correct. Right? To watch the rest of this interview, head over to bulletproofscreenwriting.tv.